In the roaring 20s, during the era of jazz and flappers, an empire of shadows thrived in the underbelly of America. At the helm of this illicit kingdom was none other than Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Al Capone, or by his ominous moniker, Scarface. This infamous mob boss ruled Chicago with an iron fist, his name synonymous with the brutal reality of organized crime. But Capone's reign was not one of benevolence. His notorious gang, the Chicago Outfit, was infamous for its ruthlessness, adopting brutal torture methods to intimidate rivals and dissenters. The infamous Chicago Overcoat, a euphemism for a coffin, and the Chicago Typewriter, slang for the Thompson submachine gun, were both trademarks of Capone's reign of terror. Capone himself once chillingly stated, "You can get much farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone." This ruthless philosophy underscored the brutal, violent tactics that kept him in power. Join us as we delve into the dark world of Al Capone's Chicago, exploring the brutal methods he employed to maintain his stranglehold on the city. Welcome to the Diary of Julius Caesar. The meteoric rise of Al Capone, shadows over the windy city. In the 1920s, amidst the backdrop of the Jazz Age, Chicago became a battleground for crime bosses. One name, Al Capone, rose from obscurity to infamy, casting a long shadow over the windy city and beyond. Born Alphonse Capone in Brooklyn, New York, on January 17, 1899, he was the son of Gabriel and Teresa Capone, Italian immigrants who dreamed of a better life for their family. Young Al, however, was lured by a different path, one that did not lead to the pursuit of the American dream in its traditional sense. Al Capone's entanglement with the underworld began in his youth. He joined two notorious street gangs, the Brooklyn Rippers and the 40 Thieves Juniors. It was in these early years that he met his mentor, Johnny Torrio, a man who would later play a pivotal role in his ascendancy in the Chicago underworld. The young Capone, impressionable and ambitious, was drawn to Torrio's sophistication and power, marking the beginning of a fateful relationship. Capone's life took a decisive turn in 1919 when the Volstead Act, ushering in the Prohibition Era, was passed. The act, intending to curb alcohol consumption, had the unintended consequence of fueling the rise of organized crime. Torrio, foreseeing the immense potential for profit, moved to Chicago to work with his uncle, Big Jim Colosimo, a prominent figure in the city's underworld. Capone was invited to join him, a move that set the stage for his rise to power. Chicago in the 1920s was a city ripe for exploitation by those willing to defy the law. The demand for alcohol was high, and Capone, under Torrio's tutelage, deftly maneuvered his way through the city's shadowy alleys, supplying the thirsty city with illicit alcohol. His charisma, combined with an iron fist, made him a formidable figure in the underworld. With Torrio's retirement in 1925, Capone assumed full control of their business, at the helm of a vast criminal empire that extended its tendrils into gambling, racketeering, and the companionship of ladies of the night. Capone's rule was not without opposition. He faced challenges from rival gangs, most notably the North Side Gang, led by George "Bugs" Moran. The competition for control over lucrative territories often led to violent confrontations, culminating in the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in 1929. The event, while never conclusively linked to Capone, underscored his ruthlessness and demonstrated the lengths he was willing to go to protect his interests. Despite his criminal activities, Capone managed to cultivate a Robin Hood-like image, often donating to charities and opening soup kitchens during the Great Depression. His charm, however, was not enough to dissuade determined law enforcement agents. The turning point came in 1931 when Capone was charged with tax evasion. His arrest marked the end of his reign, but his legacy lived on, shaping the city's perception of organized crime and its handling of illicit activities. Throughout his reign, Capone's ability to manipulate both the political and law enforcement landscape was nothing short of remarkable. He had a knack for exploiting the weaknesses of the system, bribing officials to turn a blind eye to his operations. In an era of widespread corruption, his influence seeped into every nook and cranny of Chicago's power structure. Moreover, Capone's notorious reputation was bolstered by his employment of a variety of coercive tactics. His use of enforcers and hitmen was a signature aspect of his rule. Notably, figures such as Frank Nitti, Tony Accardo, and machine gun Jack McGurn were all instrumental in reinforcing his power. These men, loyal to Capone, committed unspeakable acts on his behalf, their methods ruthless and at times unimaginably brutal. One such example of Capone's brutal rule was his alleged use of a baseball bat to maintain discipline within his organization. It is said that he once used this implement to dispatch 3 disloyal members of his gang during a banquet. Although grim, such stories only added to the aura of fear and respect surrounding him. However, Capone's reign was not unchallenged. Rival factions, most prominently the North Side gang led by Bugs Moran, were constant thorns in his side. Their feuds would often erupt into violence, leading to a constant state of unrest and contributing to the chaos of the era. The most notorious of these confrontations was the St. Valentine's Day massacre, an event that, while never definitively traced back to Capone, remains a symbol of the savage lengths to which he was willing to go in order to maintain control. In spite of his notorious activities, Capone had an uncanny ability to manipulate the system, using his influence and resources to sway the political landscape and law enforcement to his favor. Corruption was rampant during his reign, with many city officials and law enforcement agents allegedly on his payroll. His power became so pervasive that he was often able to operate with near impunity, a testament to the depth of his influence. However, Capone's criminal empire couldn't last forever. His downfall was precipitated by relentless efforts from law enforcement agents like Eliot Ness and his team, famously known as the Untouchables. Their unyielding pursuit of justice, coupled with Capone's failure to pay taxes on his ill-gotten wealth, led to his eventual incarceration. The Prohibition Era, dawn of the shadow economy. In the early 20th century, America was in the throes of the Progressive Era, a time characterized by social activism and political reform. It was during this time that a significant legislative change took place, setting the stage for a unique chapter in the country's history. The 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in 1919 and implemented in 1920, ushered in the Prohibition Era, a period that would inadvertently give rise to an underworld empire. The Prohibition Era, often referred to as the Noble Experiment, was a nationwide ban on the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Its roots can be traced back to the temperance movement, which gained momentum in the late 19th century. The advocates of this movement, many of them religious and social progressives, believed that alcohol was the root cause of many societal problems, including domestic violence and poverty. Their efforts culminated in the passage of the Volstead Act, which provided for the enforcement of the 18th Amendment. As the country ushered in this new era, the general public had mixed reactions. While some welcomed the change, viewing it as a moral victory and a step towards a more virtuous society, others saw it as an infringement on their personal liberties. This disparity in views created a significant demand for alcohol, leading to the emergence of an extensive black market. In cities like Chicago, the ban on alcohol created fertile ground for the rise of organized crime. The city, with its vast network of underground tunnels and proximity to Canada, was ideally situated for smuggling operations. This illicit industry, coupled with the public's insatiable demand for alcohol, offered an unprecedented opportunity for those daring and unscrupulous enough to take advantage. One such individual was Al Capone. Having moved to Chicago in 1919 at the behest of his mentor, Johnny Torrio, Capone found himself in a city teetering on the edge of a criminal revolution. The Volstead Act had unintentionally opened the floodgates for organized crime, and Capone, with his keen understanding of the workings of the underworld and unflinching ruthlessness, was well positioned to seize this opportunity. During this time, speakeasies, illegal bars offering patrons music, dancing, and most importantly, alcohol, sprang up across the city. These establishments, often protected by bribed law enforcement officers, became social hubs, places where the societal elite could mingle with notorious characters from the underworld. The popularity of these establishments only served to underline the widespread public defiance of the Prohibition laws. Moreover, the Prohibition era saw the rise of rum-running operations. These were sophisticated smuggling networks that transported alcohol from places where it was still legal, such as Canada and the Caribbean, into the United States. This illicit trade, often conducted under the cover of darkness, became an integral part of the shadow economy that thrived during Prohibition. The period also saw an increase in the production of rotgut alcohol and moonshine, homemade spirits that were often dangerous and sometimes lethal. The production of these substances took place in hidden stills and makeshift breweries, adding another layer of intrigue and danger to the era. Ironically, the Prohibition era, which was born out of a desire to improve societal conditions, ended up exacerbating the very problems it sought to address. The nationwide ban on alcohol led to a surge in crime rates, widespread corruption, and a general disregard for the rule of law. It was within this context that Al Capone, a man who would become synonymous with the era, rose to prominence, leveraging the opportunities presented by Prohibition to build a criminal empire that would leave a lasting legacy on the American landscape. In addition to the proliferation of organized crime, Prohibition also had a profound effect on the cultural fabric of the era. Jazz music, for instance, found its footing during these years, often echoing from the hidden corners of lively speakeasies. This era was a time of flappers and the Charleston cultural shifts that were inextricably tied to the underground nightlife that Prohibition inadvertently fostered. Indeed, the Roaring Twenties would not have roared quite so loudly without the influence of the Prohibition era. It was also during this period that the concept of the gangster was embedded in the American consciousness. This was largely due to the actions of figures like Capone, whose brazen disregard for the law and lavish lifestyle fascinated and appalled the public in equal measure. Hollywood too played its part, with films like Underworld and Little Caesar romanticizing the gangster lifestyle, further entrenching the image of the bootlegging mobster in popular culture. Nevertheless, as the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, it became increasingly clear that Prohibition was causing more harm than good. The government was losing tax revenue from alcohol sales, organized crime was at an all-time high, and the public was growing weary of the constant lawlessness. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, only served to underline the economic folly of Prohibition. The 21st Amendment, ratified in 1933, finally repealed Prohibition, marking the end of a unique and tumultuous chapter in American history, the Valentine's Day Vendetta, a bloody echo of gangland warfare. On the morning of February 14, 1929, in a nondescript garage on North Clark Street in Chicago, an event unfolded that would forever stain the annals of American criminal history. This event, known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, marked a dark turning point in the gangland wars of the Prohibition era and further cemented Al Capone's notorious reputation. The North Side Gang, led by George "Bugs" Moran, had long been a thorn in the side of Capone's South Side Italian mob. The rivalry between these two factions was bitter and bloody, with territorial disputes often resulting in violent confrontations. The escalating tensions finally culminated in an audacious act of brutality on that fateful Valentine's Day. The garage on North Clark Street was used by Moran's gang as a distribution point for their bootlegging operations. On that day, 7 members of Moran's crew were lined up against a wall by 4 men, 2 of whom were dressed as police officers. The unsuspecting victims, believing they were about to undergo a routine police raid, raised their hands in surrender. It was then that the faux officers and their accomplices opened fire with Tommy guns, unleashing a barrage of bullets. The result was a chilling tableau of violence that shocked the nation. The massacre was a clear message from Capone's gang to their rivals, an indication of the lengths they were willing to go to maintain their dominance in the city's underworld. Yet despite the severity of the crime, no one was ever convicted for the murders. Moran, the intended target of the massacre, had escaped death by mere minutes, arriving late to the meeting. While Capone was in Florida at the time of the massacre, many believed he was the architect behind the plot. The massacre was so brutal, so audacious, that it seemed only a man of Capone's ruthlessness could have conceived it. However, his involvement in the massacre was never definitively proven, allowing him to evade justice for one of the most infamous crimes of the era. The St. Valentine's Day massacre marked a significant escalation in the gangland wars of the Prohibition Era. The brutal slaying sent shockwaves through the nation, bringing the violence and lawlessness of the era into sharp focus. The public, already weary of the constant bloodshed, began to turn against the gangsters they had once viewed with a mix of fear and fascination. The massacre also had significant implications for Capone himself. Although he was never charged for the crime, the event put him squarely in the crosshairs of law enforcement agencies. The brazenness of the massacre and the public outrage that followed put pressure on authorities to bring Capone to justice. This eventually led to his downfall, as law enforcement agencies redoubled their efforts to catch him, ultimately succeeding by convicting him on charges of tax evasion. The shadow of fear, Capone's brutal methods of control. As Al Capone rose to prominence in the 1920s, he demonstrated a level of brutality that sent shockwaves through Chicago's underworld. His methods, while unquestionably cruel, were highly effective tools of intimidation, helping him maintain a firm grip on his empire. Capone was not a man to be crossed. Those who dared to defy him quickly came to regret their decision. To enforce his orders and ensure loyalty, Capone employed a variety of brutal methods. It wasn't just the specter of these methods, but the fear they instilled that enabled him to exert control over his criminal empire. One such method was the use of beatings, a form of physical punishment that Capone and his henchmen would dish out to those who crossed them. These beatings were often severe, intended not only to punish, but also to serve as a warning to others who might consider defying Capone's rule. Cigarette burns were another tool in Capone's arsenal, a cruel and painful form of punishment that left a lasting reminder of the consequences of disobedience. The use of such agonizing tactics was a testament to Capone's ruthlessness and his determination to maintain control at all costs. Perhaps the most chilling of Capone's methods was his alleged use of an ice pick. The stories of Capone using this tool to inflict pain and fear are numerous, painting a picture of a man who would stop at nothing to ensure his authority was respected. Then there was Capone's infamous use of baseball bats. While Capone was known for his love of baseball, this affinity took on a much more sinister tone when he reportedly used a baseball bat as a weapon of punishment. One notorious story that circulated during Capone's reign was of a dinner party he hosted for his gang. In the midst of the festivities, Capone suddenly turned on 3 of his men, who he believed had betrayed him. In a chilling display of calculated brutality, Capone allegedly beat the men to death with a baseball bat in front of the horrified attendees. This incident served not only as a punishment for the 3 unfortunate men, but also as a stark reminder to the rest of Capone's gang about the price of disloyalty. Despite the pervasive atmosphere of fear and violence that characterized Capone's rule, his brutal methods were shrouded in a strange kind of respect among his subordinates. To them, Capone was not just a boss, but a leader who demanded and commanded loyalty. His cruel methods were seen as a necessary evil, a way to maintain order and discipline in a world where such concepts were often fleeting. Capone's brutal tactics weren't just about maintaining control, they were also about sending a message. Each beating, each burn, each chilling use of the ice pick or baseball bat was a clear signal to anyone who dared to defy Capone's rule. They were demonstrations of his power and his willingness to use it without hesitation. Capone's iron fist, the men behind the man. When we speak of Al Capone, it's easy to picture him alone at the helm of his criminal empire. Yet, behind the scenes, a cadre of loyal enforcers stood in his shadow, ready to carry out his orders with ruthless efficiency. Among them, 3 men stood out for their unwavering loyalty and ruthless efficiency: Frank Nitti, Tony Accardo, and machine gun Jack McGurn. Frank Nitti, known as the Enforcer, was Capone's right-hand man, trusted with the organization's day-to-day operations. Nitti was a man of method and detail, ensuring the smooth running of the empire's various illicit activities. He was also a formidable figure, feared by many for his unwavering commitment to Capone's orders. It was said that Nitti's cold, calculating gaze could make even the toughest mobsters quiver in their boots. Tony Accardo, also known as Joe Batters, was another crucial part of Capone's network. The nickname Joe Batters wasn't just for show. It was a testament to Accardo's preferred method of dealing with those who crossed him. He was known to wield a baseball bat with deadly accuracy, a skill that endeared him to Capone and earned him a feared reputation in the underworld. Machine gun. Jack McGurn was perhaps the most notorious of Capone's enforcers. His moniker was derived from his weapon of choice, the Thompson submachine gun. McGurn was a master strategist, planning and executing hits with military precision. His name is often associated with the St. Valentine's Day massacre, one of the bloodiest incidents in mob history. These men, each formidable in their own right, were bound together by a common cause, the maintenance and expansion of Capone's empire. They were the silent gears turning behind the scenes, their actions shaping the Chicago underworld in ways that continue to echo through history. Their roles, however, were not just limited to enforcing Capone's rule. They were also instrumental in maintaining a complex system of alliances and rivalries that kept the empire running. Their diplomatic skills, as much as their propensity for violence, were crucial to keeping Capone at the top of the underworld hierarchy. Each of these men had a unique relationship with Capone. Nitti, the reliable lieutenant, was Capone's eyes and ears on the ground. Accardo, the brutal enforcer, was his weapon, ready to strike at a moment's notice. McGurn, the tactician, was his shield, planning and executing operations that kept their enemies at bay. Yet, despite their loyalty, their service to Capone was not without its own risks. Living in the shadow of such a notorious figure meant that they too were targets. They lived on the edge, constantly at risk from rival gangs and law enforcement. The unquiet streets, Capone's rivals, and the battle for Chicago. The reign of Al Capone was not unchallenged. The landscape of Prohibition-era Chicago was a battlefield, and Capone was not the only general. Numerous rival gangs, each vying for control of the city's lucrative illicit market, clashed with Capone's empire, leading to an era marked by violence, bloodshed, and intense rivalry. The most prominent of Capone's rivals was George "Bugs" Moran and his North Side gang. Moran, like Capone, was a man with ambitions. He sought control of the city's underground, and his aspirations put him directly in Capone's crosshairs. Their rivalry was one of the defining elements of the time, a brutal tug-of-war that left the streets of Chicago stained with blood. Bugs Moran was a different breed of mobster than Capone. He was flamboyant, ostentatious, and unabashedly violent. His audacious actions, including his attempts to take over Capone's territory, led to a series of confrontations that escalated the violence in the city. Their rivalry reached its peak on a chilling day in February 1929 with the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. Capone's men, reportedly led by Jack McGurn, gunned down 7 of Moran's gang in a garage, a brutal act meant to send a clear message to their rivals. Though Moran himself narrowly escaped the massacre, the event marked a significant escalation in the violence between the two factions. However, the North Side gang was not Capone's only adversary. The city was a web of rivalries and alliances, with other figures such as the Jenner brothers and Joe Aiello seeking to carve out their own piece of the city's underworld. Each rival presented a unique challenge, and Capone had to navigate these treacherous waters carefully to maintain his grip on power. These rivalries were not merely personal disputes, they were battles for control of a city where the prohibition of alcohol had created a lucrative black market. Every rival gang sought a piece of this pie, and their clashes over territory, influence, and resources fueled the violence and chaos of the era. The constant threat of violence from rival gangs kept Capone and his men on their toes. They were always prepared for a possible attack, knowing that their hold on the city was only as secure as their ability to defend it. This tension created an atmosphere of constant vigilance and suspicion, where trust was scarce and loyalty was paramount. While the rivalries with other gangs certainly posed a significant challenge, they also served to solidify Capone's control over his empire. Each victory over a rival gang not only eliminated a threat, but also served to strengthen Capone's position. The more rivals he defeated, the more powerful he became. Capone's underworld kingdom, a spectacle of power and illicit trade. Al Capone, the notorious mob boss of the 1920s, ruled over a vast criminal empire. The Chicago underworld was his kingdom, and from his throne, he controlled an array of illicit operations that spanned the city and beyond. His reign was marked by an audacious display of power and an uncanny ability to manipulate the mechanisms of organized crime. Capone's empire was a well-oiled machine with different cogs turning to maintain a steady flow of illicit profits. One of the primary sources of revenue was illegal gambling. Gambling dens littered the city, hidden behind the facade of legitimate businesses. Inside these establishments, fortunes were won and lost, and Capone's empire reaped the benefits. The sale of illicit spirits was another cornerstone of Capone's empire. The prohibition of alcohol had created a thirsty market, and Capone was more than willing to quench it. He built an extensive network of breweries and distilleries, smuggling alcohol into the city and distributing it through a series of speakeasies. These underground bars, often masked as soda shops or restaurants, were havens for those seeking a taste of forbidden liquor. In the shadows of Capone's empire, ladies of the night were also woven into the fabric of his operations. These establishments, catering to the city's loneliness and desires, were a source of substantial income. Capone understood that the oldest profession in the world could be profitable if managed correctly. He ensured these operations ran smoothly, offering protection and maintaining a sense of order within their chaotic world. Despite its inherent lawlessness, Capone's empire was a model of organized crime. It was a complex system with a hierarchy and rules, a testament to Capone's leadership and business acumen. At the top of this pyramid sat Capone himself, the king of his underworld kingdom. Capone's rule was absolute, maintained through a combination of fear, respect, and loyalty. He surrounded himself with trusted lieutenants, men like Frank Nitti and Tony Accardo, who enforced his orders and ensured the smooth running of his operations. He relied on their loyalty and their ruthlessness, knowing that their actions were essential to maintaining his grip on the city. But maintaining control of such a vast empire was not without its challenges. Capone had to navigate a labyrinth of rival gangs, corrupt officials, and law enforcement. He had to maintain a delicate balance, ensuring his operations ran smoothly while avoiding the attention of the authorities. Capone's empire, despite its criminal nature, was a marvel of organization and efficiency. It was a testament to Capone's ability to control and manage a sprawling network of illegal operations, each contributing to the wealth and power of his reign. His rule was a spectacle of power, a showcase of how far ambition and ruthlessness could take a man in a city ripe for the taking. Capone's Dark Ballet, a dance with politics and law enforcement. In the Prohibition Era Chicago, Al Capone's influence extended far beyond the confines of his criminal empire. His cunning and charisma allowed him to infiltrate the world of politics and law enforcement, creating a network of allies that protected him from prosecution and ensured the longevity of his reign. Capone's ability to corrupt the political landscape was a crucial element of his power. He understood that the key to maintaining control was to secure the loyalty of those who held the reins of the city. To achieve this, he employed a combination of bribery, intimidation, and charm, ensuring that politicians and city officials danced to his tune. A prime example of Capone's reach into politics was his relationship with Chicago's city council, known as the Grey Wolves. These corrupt aldermen turned a blind eye to Capone's operations, accepting bribes in exchange for their silence and support. In return, Capone's empire flourished, unimpeded by the interference of the city's government. Capone's influence also extended to the police force, a vital ally in his quest for power. He managed to corrupt officers at various levels, who would provide him with valuable information and protection. These law enforcement officials were more than willing to look the other way, as long as Capone's money continued to flow into their pockets. Capone's relationship with law enforcement was not merely one of bribery and corruption. He also sought to create a sense of loyalty and camaraderie. He cultivated personal relationships with many officers, inviting them to his extravagant parties and offering them gifts and favors. These gestures served to blur the lines between law and crime, creating a tangled web of allegiance that shielded Capone from prosecution. This intricate dance with politics and law enforcement allowed Capone to operate with relative impunity for many years. His influence within the city's power structures insulated him from the consequences of his actions, making him seem almost untouchable. However, Capone's dance with power was not without its risks. While he enjoyed the protection of his political and law enforcement allies, he also became a target for those who sought to expose his corruption. Journalists, such as Jake Lingle, tirelessly pursued the truth behind Capone's dealings, putting his empire and his freedom in jeopardy. As the years went by, Capone's grip on the city began to weaken. His dance with politics and law enforcement became more precarious, and his network of allies began to unravel. The authorities, now under increasing pressure to bring Capone to justice, started to close in. In the end, it was not the violent crimes of his empire that brought Capone down, but the mundane matter of tax evasion. Despite his vast network of political and law enforcement allies, Capone could not escape the reach of the law forever. In 1931, he was finally convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The unraveling of a criminal kingpin, Capone's downfall. Al Capone's reign of terror in Prohibition-era Chicago seemed unstoppable, but even the most powerful of empires eventually crumble. It was a combination of relentless pursuit by law enforcement agents and his own financial transgressions that would ultimately spell the downfall of the notorious crime lord. As Capone's influence and criminal activities grew, so too did the determination of federal agents to bring him to justice. One such agent was Eliot Ness, a young and ambitious member of the Bureau of Prohibition. Appointed to lead a special team in 1929, Ness assembled a group of incorruptible agents who became known as the Untouchables. Their sole mission, to dismantle Capone's empire and put an end to his reign of terror. While the Untouchables focused on disrupting Capone's bootlegging operations, they faced an uphill battle. Despite their successes in seizing illegal liquor and arresting members of Capone's gang, they struggled to build a case against the kingpin himself. Capone's extensive network of corruption and his knack for evading responsibility made it difficult for Ness and his team to pin any serious charges on him. However, an opportunity arose in an unexpected form: tax evasion. The federal government, eager to find a way to bring Capone down, decided to shift its focus to his financial dealings. In 1927, the Supreme Court ruled that illegal income was subject to income tax, and this opened the door for prosecution against Capone on the grounds of tax evasion. It was Frank J. Wilson, a skilled investigator from the Treasury Department's intelligence unit, who meticulously pieced together the evidence against Capone. He and his team combed through the complex web of financial transactions, gathering information from ledgers, bank records, and even personal notebooks, ultimately building a case that would prove impossible for Capone to dodge. In 1931, Capone was finally indicted on 22 counts of tax evasion, along with more than 5,000 other violations of the Volstead Act. The stage was set for a dramatic courtroom showdown, with prosecutor George E.Q. Johnson leading the government's case. The trial, held in October 1931, was a media sensation, drawing attention from across the nation. Despite Capone's attempts to bribe and intimidate jury members, the judge swiftly replaced the jury with a new, untainted panel. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Capone guilty on several counts of tax evasion. On October 24, 1931, Judge James H. Wilkerson sentenced Capone to 11 years in federal prison, along with a hefty fine and court costs. Capone's downfall sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, signaling the end of an era. He was first sent to a penitentiary in Atlanta before being transferred to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in San Francisco Bay in 1934. There, he would serve the majority of his sentence. his health deteriorating due to the effects of syphilis. Shadows of Capone, the mobster's echo in popular culture. The haunting figure of Al Capone, once a sovereign of the Chicago underworld, has been immortalized in the kaleidoscope of popular culture, where his notorious reign has been depicted, dissected, and dramatized. The allure of his turbulent story has led to a myriad of representations across the spectrum of books, movies, series, and documentaries. In the realm of cinema, the celluloid image of Capone has been brilliantly portrayed by a variety of actors, each imbuing the character with their unique interpretation. In the 1932 classic Scarface, the lead character, Tony Camonte, was directly inspired by Capone, reflecting his ruthlessness and ambition. Fast forward to 1987, and the gangster's life was vividly brought to life in The Untouchables, where Robert De Niro's depiction of Capone was nothing short of riveting. On the smaller screen, the HBO series Boardwalk Empire, 2010 to 2014, captures the early era of Capone's rise, painting an engaging portrait of the complexities of his character. The show delves into the dynamics of power, corruption, and the volatile cocktail of dangerous substances, mirroring the 1920s Prohibition Era. The year 2020 saw Tom Hardy's transformation into Capone in the film Capone, which showcased the mobster's final years, providing a stark contrast to the vibrant and violent years of his reign. In the realm of literature, Capone's life has inspired a myriad of books. Lawrence Bergreen's Capone, The Man and the Era meticulously chronicles the mobster's life, providing an insightful exploration of the socio-political climate that enabled his rise. In a similar vein, Jonathan Aig's Get Capone offers a comprehensive account of the efforts to bring Capone to justice. For those seeking a fictional spin, Jennifer Choldenko's Al Capone Does My Shirts presents a unique perspective as it tells the story of a young boy whose father works at Alcatraz during Capone's imprisonment there. Despite being a children's book, it subtly explores the legend of Capone. Documentaries, on the other hand, have sought to present an unvarnished account of Capone's life. The BBC's The Real Godfathers features an episode titled Al Capone, Scarface, offering an objective portrayal of the mobster's life and crimes. Similarly, the History Channel's The True Story of Scarface provides an in-depth exploration of Capone's reign and the societal impact of his actions. In addition, Capone's character has been leveraged in several video games, like the Godfather series and Mafia Definitive Edition, where his influence on the gangster genre is clearly visible. It's clear that Al Capone's shadow stretches far beyond his earthly life, reaching into the recesses of our collective imagination through the varied prisms of popular culture. His tale, a blend of power, downfall, and an insatiable thirst for control, continues to fascinate, horrify, and intrigue. In the symphony of American history, the discordant notes of Al Capone's era still reverberate. A time when lawlessness danced with corruption, leaving a trail of societal upheaval in its wake. A period when the rule of law was challenged, leading to the transformation of legal and law enforcement practices. The echo of Capone's reign, the melody of his infamous deeds, continues to resonate in our popular culture, law enforcement strategies, and societal memory. His life serves as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power, the allure of the forbidden, and the inevitable fall from grace that follows a dance with darkness. His story, as infamous FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover once stated, reminds us that no amount of law enforcement can solve a problem that goes back to the family. As the curtain falls on our exploration of Capone's life and crimes, we leave you with these haunting notes, a grim composition of ambition, power, and downfall, echoing through the annals of American history. And so, until the next time we delve into the darker corners of our past, remember, history's lessons are written not only in the deeds of heroes, but also in the shadows cast by figures like Al Capone. Keep listening, keep learning. Goodbye, and take care.